Andrew Chang stands on a small floating pier in a San Diego lagoon.
Well, you want to take a closer look.
Chang works at the Carlsbad aqua farm.
While we're bagging, we're also checking for quality.
The small hatchery has been selling oysters and mussels to restaurants and other businesses for 50 years.
So right now we're on one of our flub seas.
It's a floating system that pulls water and nutrients up through silos that are full of fledgling shellfish.
The term would be oyster seed, and they're anywhere from 1 to 3 centimeters to begin with. When I pull these up, you'll see that they're, 5 or 6 at this point.
When these oysters get big enough, they'll be placed in square plastic trays stacked 10 high. Those stacks are underwater in the Agua Hedionda Lagoon in Carlsbad. Production manager Matt Stenke pulls a boat next to a barrel-shaped buoy above one of those underwater stacks.
Now these stacks of oysters are about 100 to 150 pounds. And the top tray is empty. We just put a couple of rocks in the top and it keeps the stack compressed together.
Stenke says the oysters will live here, filtering water until they're fully grown. Their last stop is a few days of rinsing in a nearby building, and then they're packed for market. But this seed to lagoon to purification bins to market cycle was interrupted by a changing climate in 2007. The planet's oceans were absorbing larger amounts of carbon, turning the colder waters of the Pacific Northwest increasingly acidic. Unfortunately for oyster growers, that's where all of their seed stock was grown.
When ocean acidification hit the Pacific Northwest, they were reporting a 90 to 95% failure in their normal production. And you ended up with a lot of farmers who had open space to grow things and they were unable to buy seed. And that problem persisted for a few years.
The industry adapted, and here in Carlsbad, they now grow some of their own seed. But Stenke says the real threat isn't going away.
It's possible that in 10 or 15 years, we start seeing more severe failures of crop, and possibly in our waters or in the rest of the industry.
And the change is already happening. The ocean is warming as it absorbs carbon dioxide.
And that can be difficult for the existing ecosystems.
Scripps Institution of Oceanography researcher Dan Cahan says the warm ocean waters are less likely to mix with nutrient-rich water at deeper levels. In essence, the warming water is choking off the food supply. Cahan says that's not all.
The warmer the oceans get, the less oxygen it can accommodate. Low oxygen is not good in general for ecosystems.
As the ocean draws in more carbon from the atmosphere, Cahan says it's also changing the chemistry of the water.
The acidity in the ocean has increased by about 30%, and that makes it more difficult for calcareous, shelled, and skeletal parts of the kind of baseline for the food chain to develop.
Though the changes and their impacts will be gradual, Carlsbad Aqua Farm CEO Thomas Grimm is already working to prepare.
The alarm for me is that it's changing faster than in some aspects that nature could keep up with, because nature adapts, and it adapts as it can, but sometimes it's going faster than wildlife and marine life can keep up with, so the spaces where they're familiar with surviving or adapted to no longer are available for them.
Grimm wants to keep his business from being overwhelmed by changes in the ocean ecosystem. Part of that solution is under the buoys that are just over his shoulder.
Those are our research floats. There's both ball floats and barrel floats, but underneath them are families of oysters in different configurations. Some are very small groupings in specialized cages from Australia, and they're used to grow out selectively bred oysters from a research project at USC.
Grimm says oysters have survived other ecological upheavals, and he says finding and breeding those resilient species is important. He says the changing ocean will change the business.
So you have to be ahead of what's going on, and then have enough resilient stock that is adapted to the changing chemistry, as you point out.
And while this business is fine now, there is concern about the future. and that future is dealing with climate change. Erik Anderson, KPBS News.